All right. Hi, everybody. Today we will have a new episode for the speaker series for the summer, and this one will be slightly different than the other ones. So this is our back to school special. And today I'll be essentially having a conversation with my friend Danielle, who previously presented on in the series. And we'll talk about balancing running and studying or working or whatever else you do in life other than running. And there's a lot of time management things that we'll talk about, and we'll kind of talk about our favorite strategies in order to balance some very busy lives. So welcome, Danielle.
Thank you.
Oh, you need to move the slide.
There we go. Sorry.
Great. So I just want to start this presentation by saying that, you know what, balancing everything in our very busy lives can be quite difficult and feel a little bit overwhelming at times. And we're maybe a little bit older than somebody who's in university and running, but definitely that kind of stays throughout your life. But there really are a lot of strategies available to help with managing your time as well as being more productive. Okay, so the first thing that I really want to talk about before we get into maybe some strategies about time management productivity is the idea of really reframing stress and having a mindset that will allow us to maybe see stress in a different way. So the mindset that allows us to kind of do that is essentially a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. So if we change our perception of what stress is and how we feel about stress, that can really help us reduce some anxiety and alleviate some stress essentially from all the tasks that we have in our life. So as runners, we already know that, you know, if you want to run faster, you have to like stress your body with a workout, and that workout then when you rest is essentially going to make you into a faster runner. So the same applies with any stressors applied in other areas of your life. So for example, studying for exams or doing a hard work project, that's essentially a stress. And then once that is done, you take a rest and you become stronger through that process. So stress is really like your body's natural way of preparing for a challenge. So if you see that stress more so as a challenge than a threat, then you really can just, you know, take a deep breath, just relax and just do the tasks that you need to do. So here's some just characteristics of a growth mindset. So it's really viewing any challenges as opportunities, acknowledging and embracing your weaknesses and not seeing that as something that is limiting to you in your life, but really as something, you know that you can work on. And if you target those specific weaknesses, then they will no longer be weaknesses. You can learn to give and receive constructive criticism. Another growth mindset item is intelligence and talent is dynamic and ever evolving. So that's also something that you can work on. And you can work on that through prioritizing learning over seeking approval. Definitely something I've learned being a graduate student for the last decade or so is that there's just so much that we don't know, and that is okay. And learning the things that we don't know is totally fine, and we can't know everything at once anyways. And focusing on the process instead of the end result. So today we'll talk about like little strategies that you can do in your day-to-day to really focus on the tasks that you have to do throughout the day, and focusing on those tasks instead of, let's say, getting a good grade or getting a specific time in a race really does reduce your outlook, like your stressful outlook on things. And a few other ones. So be inspired by the success of others, thinking of learning as brain training. So as we said, you know, running is training for your body, but then learning and reading and studying is really training for your brain. And understanding that failure is really an opportunity to grow. So we all fail. We're all going to fail at some point. I failed so many times, but if you learn from those experiences, that only makes you stronger in the future. And finally, persist in the face of setbacks. So all those characteristics are those of a growth mindset.
And then I'm just going to go through sort of what the opposite of that would look like. So what a fixed mindset would look like. So someone with a fixed mindset would be more likely to sort of avoid any challenges or shy away from things that you don't know or that sort of might make you uncomfortable. and sort of be afraid to take on sort of new challenges or risks. Sort of being unable to handle any criticism or feedback. Feeling like your intelligence and talent is static and does not develop. Not carrying out any actions without seeking approval. So just sort of being afraid to take initiative. And then sort of being focused on proving yourself and being threatened by the success of others, rather than sort of doing things such as focusing on the process and then sort of along the way being inspired by the success of others, like Aïda talked about. Someone with a fixed mindset might regard their effort as not fruitful. They would feel like failure was sort of a sign as a limit of their ability, and they might give up easily. So all of these things obviously are going to be detrimental to your success, both as an athlete, but also sort of in the classroom and then just in life in general.
Great. Go ahead, Danielle. The Sunday scaries.
So we're going to move into sort of the first, I guess the next section of our talk here, where we're going to talk about sort of how we both set ourselves up for a successful week. And so I'm sure we've all sort of experienced what we're calling the Sunday scaries. And so this is where you're looking at your week and you're either feeling super overwhelmed by all the things that you have to do. Maybe you're not even sure where to start because you haven't sort of planned ahead or sort of come up with a strategy for how you're going to deal with sort of everything that you have during the week. And, sort of worrying about meals and all the different things that you have to accomplish in the week. And so we're going to go through sort of each of our strategies and sort of how we would approach perhaps our Sunday scaries and how we try to eliminate that, or at least reduce our sort of that anxiety that might come sort of as we look to the week ahead. And I'll let Aïda start with that, with sort of her approach, and then I'll sort of share mine. I don't know if you have anything to add here, Aïda, or if you want to just go ahead to your slide.
No, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay, so one of my favorite strategies, really, it's called time blocking, and it's essentially blocking time in your calendar. And I'm just giving an example here of like a typically busier week now that I am not really studying anymore, not a student, but I kind of like do more work as a postdoc. And while I still try to get in some exercise as well as some coaching as well. And when I time block my week, I really do it so that in my busy schedule, when sometimes I have to be in two places in the same day for work, and I have a dog which I have to make sure gets walked multiple times a day, I block pretty much every single minute of my day, so that I'm never asking myself like, oh, well, what do I have to do now? Like, what's my next task? I just have to open my calendar and look at my calendar and be like, okay, well, I'm working until, for example, on Monday until noon. At noon, I'm going to have lunch and organize a few things around my house, probably like put my dishes away. This is like still COVID time, so we're still doing quite a bit of work from home. And then I time block my travel to where I need to go as well. And for sure, this doesn't like remain fixed throughout the week. So I do it usually on Sundays on the weekend. I take some time to myself to do that, or Monday mornings, and things will definitely evolve throughout the week, which is why I also like using a digital calendar, because then it's very easy to switch things around and change your schedule. Something else I like to do, evidently everything is like color coded, so different activities come with different colors. So visually, it's very simple to see as well where I have to be and what I have to do. Another thing that I find really helpful as well, because we don't want to forget like our social activities and so on. Working out is definitely important, but socializing is just as important. So I find for me who's in a relationship, and especially now in a long distance relationship, there's some time blocks where I have a joint calendar with my partner, and that's really helpful, because if there's some times or appointments or something like that we want the other person to know about, then we put those in our joint calendar, and it kind of just helps to see the other person's week as well. And then it's easier to just plan times to like FaceTime and see each other and talk and so on. Yeah, so that's pretty much why is it me, it's like really to know where I'm going to be at what time and that I don't really have to make too many decisions. And in my work block, sometimes as well, I'll write like specific tasks that I want to accomplish at that time. So it really takes away a lot of decision making throughout the week, which does save a lot of time for me personally.
Okay, and then we'll move ahead to my week and just sort of how I approach things. So, for those of you who either didn't tune into my earlier talk or else maybe don't remember, I'm a family med resident at the U of A, and so I am sort of here, there, and everywhere doing different rotations as a part of my training. I did recently come off maternity leave, so I had to sort of draw a little bit farther back to find sort of a week that was representative of sort of my usual life. So going back to September of 2020, I was on an internal medicine rotation here. And so similar to Aïda, I sort of put the big things into my calendar. It's all color coded sort of based on what the activity is. You'll see that sort of in my schedule, it's a bit different than Aïda, where I tend not to sort of do as much of the time blocking. I sometimes find that then I get overwhelmed with how many things are just in my calendar and sort of feeling like if my schedule changes or if I run late or something like that or something new comes up, then sometimes I find that adds stress when I feel like I'm not doing what I was supposed to be doing. But I like to keep sort of the blocks of time that are empty open, and that sort of allows me to visually see, okay, here I have, a block of time from, let's say, it looks like I was on call overnight, so realistically I was coming home to sleep. But I could sort of say, okay, maybe from noon to 4:30 when I'm planning to work out, would be a good time if I'm going to book an appointment or something. And then obviously if I booked an appointment, I would put that into my calendar. If I knew I was going to go get groceries or something like that, I would probably schedule that in as well, just so that I didn't forget to go do that. But then in terms of like studying and doing those things, my sort of approach is more just to see those gaps in my schedule and make sure that I have those gaps to sort of take care of those little things. But I do like to have sort of the things that I know each day that I need to get done in there. So my either my school schedule or my work schedule, and then any sort of runs, and especially if it's a run where I'm committed to meeting a group or a person at a certain time, so that I just have that in there. And then sort of the extra stuff would be on top of that. And I did include an example just from when I was a student, just because that looks quite a bit different. And so again, here you sort of see, okay, classes are scheduled, meetings with groups are scheduled. I do have my runs in here and sort of what that specific run was going to look like. And then appointments. And again, it's all color coded. The other thing I do is I typically put in any deadlines as an all day event and then set it so that I get a reminder depending on the event, sort of either the day before to make sure that I'm done and I've submitted it, or sometimes it will be, I'll set a reminder for like a week or something before, just so that I'm cued to make sure that I'm working on that. But those I sort of separate out by putting them as an all day thing, just so I can see sort of on a brief look at the week what needs to get done at the top. So that's sort of my approach, which is slightly different than Aïda's, but sort of effective nonetheless. And I do as well have a shared calendar with my partner. We now have a almost 1-year-old, and so sort of scheduling his stuff especially has been super important to have that shared calendar, so that if one of us books something that's relevant to either needing childcare or sort of something that we both want to be there for him, that it sort of immediately pops up in both of our calendars, so that neither of us is missing that. So just some sort of practical tips, maybe not as relevant when you're a student, but definitely sort of longer term.
Yeah, so definitely, as you saw between me and Danielle, time blocking, I think, or putting things in your calendar is very essential, but there's different ways to do it, and you should do what suits your needs and what makes you feel the best.
And I guess the other thing that I will add is I now like to use my digital calendar, because then it's on my phone and my laptop. But when I was in undergrad, which was before 2014, so we're going back a little ways, I did like to use a handwritten planner, and I found that that was effective for me as well. So some people I know love to do the handwritten style. I just found that as I sort of moved further along in my life, I would always forget it at home, and then it was effectively not effective at all. But if that's something that works for you, then that's great. And I know there's all sorts of sort of fancy planners now. You can do like the bullet journaling where you sort of make it very visually appealing. So if that's something that works for you, then that's great as well.
Great. So the next little topic that we'll talk about is optimizing some routines. And the next few slides, actually, a lot of these ideas come from a book I read not a few years back now. It's been out for a few years, and it's called Peak Performance. And it's by some quite popular authors, so Brad Stulberg and Steve Magness. And Steve Magness is a quite renowned distance running coach in the States. And a lot of their ideas are really good. So if you're looking for more strategies to like optimize your day and like really achieve peak performance, I'd really recommend that book. So we'll start by talking a little bit about developing routines. So routines are great strategies to, have a sequence of activities and to really put a lot of structure in your life and make sure you don't forget very important things. So for example, I really like a good morning routine. I probably get up way more earlier than I would need to be somewhere. But I find if I have like a good morning routine where I take my time to wake up and I don't feel rushed, and I go outside and walk my dog, and then maybe look at my to-do list. I always clean up a little bit in the morning and make sure I eat breakfast. If I do all of those steps in the morning, I feel a lot more like settled and ready to get on with my day, versus if I like maybe don't do that routine and I get really, really rushed, then I just feel rushed and kind of stressed for the rest of the day. So establishing those routines, especially like morning routines and nighttime routines, are really important and really help to give you structure and also honestly to like reduce stress. A good way to work with your routines to create maybe like new habits and so on is to link behaviors to specific cues or routines. So if you want to add a new behavior into your life, for example, if you're like, oh, I should really do a lot more foam rolling, like I'm starting a new like cross country season and I'm increasing my mileage and I don't want to forget, then for example, associating like that behavior of like self-therapy and foam rolling to like when you watch Netflix, then every time you want to watch Netflix, you'll cue yourself to be like, oh, I should be foam rolling right now. So that really helps in like creating new behaviors. And then finally, it's important to be consistent, because the more consistent you are with your routines, they say it takes like 30 days to make a habit, but the more consistent you are, the more second nature they become. And the more structure you have, I guess, in your life. Another thing I want to talk about is creating a place of your own. So in order to do those routines or habits, but also to be able to work productively. I know sometimes we're like, life comes, in different stages and you live in different places. And sometimes if you're a student, you're moving around a lot. And now like a lot of people who have jobs also move around a lot. And sometimes it's difficult to maybe have your own like designated like office space or workspace and so on. But it is important to create like an environment that is similar every day for similar activities, because that just helps, I guess, your brain to make the connection between a space and an activity and reinforces those like productivity pathways. So a good idea, for example, if you want to study but you don't necessarily have an office, is make sure you have kind of like a designated workspace, a little desk in your room, or if you have like a quiet spot in your living room, you can put a little desk or something like that. And if you're working in a shared space and you don't have necessarily a desk, then you can use certain objects to cue like the behavior of studying, let's say. So for example, always like sit down to study with your favorite cup of tea or your favorite pencil and your favorite notebook, and having those like objects in your space associated with a specific behavior will just like set you up better to work in that space. Do you have anything to add, Danielle?
Not a ton. I think, yeah, sort of what you said. Either if you can sort of set up a space for yourself, then I think that that's great. But the reality is that isn't always possible, especially when you're living in a sort of a bigger city and rent is um, expensive and you don't necessarily get that extra space. Apartments are small. um, so yeah, like I just said, figuring out a way to sort of designate a space, and if you can't sort of designate the space, then designating certain sort of objects or behaviors that just sort of help you to get into that mindset of um, productivity or work, sort of whatever kind of work it is.
Mhm. And we will talk a little bit about sleep hygiene later, but one thing I want to mention with respect to doing certain activities in certain spaces, they do say that your bed should only be for sleeping and not necessarily studying or doing, maybe watching TV might be okay, but yeah, you'll get a better sleep if your bed remains for sleeping, essentially.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to go forward. Um, so next we're going to talk a little bit about sort of designing your day. And so a quote that sort of we came across was become a minimalist to become a maximalist. And so really this is about sort of looking at all the different decisions you have to make during the day and trying to sort of make as many of these decisions as simple as possible, especially for the things that sort of aren't super important to sort of put a ton of thought or sort of time into. So some of these things might be when you're looking at your wardrobe, let's say, and most of us have been on vacation, and when we have a suitcase filled with only our sort of few favorite outfits, it's often a lot quicker and a lot easier to get dressed because we don't have sort of that overwhelming number of choices. And so just sort of thinking about that when you're, I guess, picking out your wardrobe and maybe thinking of things that you could get rid of to just sort of give your mind some space and some sort of clarity in that. Sort of finding a way to automate what you're going to eat at meals and not having a plan around that and maybe having some sort of go-to things can be super helpful, and we'll elaborate on that a little bit more later on. And then, like we sort of alluded to with the time blocking in our schedule, sort of when to complete daily activities. So it can be super helpful to have a routine. Like Aïda said, she always gets up and walks her dog in the morning. And so then she knows that that activity is going to be done as a part of her morning routine. But having that sort of time blocking for different activities can be super helpful just in terms of not having to sort of think about it or stress about when you're going to get that done in a day. Um, a second sort of point that can be super helpful is thinking about sort of where you're going to live in the context of how you sort of want your life to look. And as a student, this isn't always possible because often you're looking for sort of the cheapest option, a place that you can sort of fit in with the roommates that you have, or you may want to just be close to your school. But sort of thinking about, what things are desirable to be close to. So do you want to be able to walk to the grocery store? Do you want to be able to walk to a coffee shop? Where are you planning to run or do your exercise? And, it's great if you can go straight from your front door as opposed to having to get in your car and, let's say, drive to a trailhead or something like that, sort of for your day-to-day running type activities. And then the other thing would be considering your commute, whether it's to work or to school. So are you close enough that you could walk or ride your bike or potentially run commute or maybe take the train or the metro? Or are you somewhere that, you're having to drive and sit in rush hour traffic for sort of 45 minutes, an hour, and just sort of considering that as with regards to sort of how that's going to affect your stress and how that's going to affect your time management as well. Aïda, do you want to add anything here?
No, I think you were pretty, all encompassing on this idea of designing your day.
Okay. I will move on. Okay, and then this is just sort of to add on top of that. So, when you're designing your day, so trying to match your activities sort of with your energy levels. So, some of us are morning people, some of us are sort of night owls. And sort of once you know that about yourself, figuring out which activities you're going to be able to accomplish sort of at what time. So if you have activities that you find that are super sort of cognitively demanding, you might want to do those activities, first of all, when you're rested, but also during those time periods when you know that you're the most productive. So for a lot of people, that's in the morning, but for some people, that's later at night. And so if you know that that's when you sort of do your best studying or your best whatever it may be, sort of trying to plan that that is when you will do those more demanding or stressful activities. And that just helps you to sort of design your day. Protecting your time is also important. So making sure that you have time sort of scheduled for those things that are important and that need to get done. But then also not fighting fatigue. So if you sit down to work and you find that things aren't going well, or you're not sort of able to focus, that maybe it's a signal that you need a break, or that you sort of should take a step back and then come back to things later. And Ida's going to elaborate more on this sort of idea in a minute here, so I won't belabor that point. And then the second thing in terms of just designing your day would be to just surround yourself with people that sort of help you to achieve the goals that you're looking to achieve. So having people around you that sort of share, positive energy, motivation, the same drive that you have, that can be super contagious and super helpful to sort of set you on the right path. And we all sort of know those people that, let's say, we can get into a super good, let's say, study groove with. But then we also know those people who, they're great people, great energy, but when we sit down to study with them, we end up just having a conversation about our lives and having a difficult time being productive. And so, if you have a super big midterm or super big final the next day, maybe that's not the person to go sit at your favorite cafe with. Maybe that's a better person to say, hey, when I'm done studying, like, do you want to go for a run or, a walk or whatever it may be, to sort of blow off some steam. And so just finding those people that sort of help you achieve your goals at each different point in your day, and finding people that sort of are positive and sort of help build you up instead of sort of putting you down, or I guess bringing negativity or pessimism into your life. Anything to add, Ida?
Yeah, maybe I just want to add a note on the idea of protecting your time. So let's say you are the most productive between 9 and 11, and somebody wants to like meet with you at that time, or like go for a coffee date or whatever. It's totally okay to be like, hey, no, can we reschedule? Like, that's when I do my most productive work. And if that is like, so it's important to really, if you're rushed, especially if you're rushed in a week and you have a really busy week, then really protect that time and use it to the best of your advantage. And I know some friends who totally do that. They're like, no, we cannot meet at this time. This is when I'm working. And that's totally fine. And then if you do know that you have times where it's a bit harder to concentrate or in something like that, then that's a great time to like, just like answer emails, do some menial tasks, or like go see friends, or go on like maybe less study dates.
Great. Okay, I will move to the next one.
Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about some strategies to get ourselves into a deep focus situation and so with that time that we have, which sometimes can be a little bit limited with a lot of classes or work, if we have time, like empty time blocks, how can we optimize those empty time blocks in order to do as many things as we can in that time? So first off, you need to cultivate a deep focus and then perfect that practice. So during that time, it's important to stay as concentrated as possible. And that is a skill that can be learned over time. It can be very difficult at first to try and concentrate and take away all of the distractors around us, but it is something that we get better with over time. I definitely know that from experience. I'm much better now at staying focused than I was before. One key thing to do, however, at the beginning of like a work block, is to remove all distractors. So that means like put your phone on do not disturb, or remove notifications, maybe even just close your email, close your like texting app on your computer. And I know now all the devices are linked, so they all kind of ring at once. So just make sure you take off all those notifications, and that will really help in order to become focused. And another thing that really helps with being focused is focusing on only one thing at a time, because actually multitasking is kind of a myth and it doesn't actually necessarily work. So if we're task switching all the time, if let's say we're trying to like write a paper and then we're like, oh, I just want to check an email as soon as it came in, then switching between those tasks is actually going to reduce your productivity and make you less effective at the first task that you wanted to do. And then it's also important to work in, like, they call blocks of like discrete blocks of like a specific amount of time, because we're actually not able to work continuously, let's say for 4 or 5 hours straight. We definitely need breaks, and taking those breaks, I know you're losing work time, but it does make you more effective during the blocks of time that you are working. So I'll just talk about one technique that is quite common and I use a lot and I really, really like. So it's called the Pomodoro technique. And it's a technique to basically work as effectively as possible. And the idea is to split up your work in small chunks of time with breaks in between those small chunks. So first of all, before you want to start a work session, it's also good to create like an objective for that work session. And that can really help with your focus as well. So let's say I have 2 hours and I have to, in my case, like write an abstract for a conference. I'll be like, okay, these 2 hours are dedicated to my abstract and I'm going to try to do nothing else, which sometimes can be difficult. Some days it's harder than others, that's for sure. We're not all, it's not all perfect, but applying some of these strategies definitely does help. So let's say I have 2 hours and I'm going to work on my abstract. So the Pomodoro technique essentially is working for 25 minutes, really focused work. So remove all distractors, like turn off your phone, turn off your email. You can even put your phone in a separate room, and then put a timer on. And after those 25 minutes, then you take a 5-minute break. And you do that cycle over again. You can do it 4 to 5 times. And they say after about like 4 to 5 Pomodoros, they call it. So the 25 minutes plus 5 minutes is 1 Pomodoro. Then you can take a little bit of a longer break. And it's important to take a break. You can get up, stretch your legs, and try not to do any work during that time. And I personally find this strategy extremely effective to be productive. So if I am stressed for time and I'm like, I have so much to do, and I feel like I have not a lot of time to do those things, then I always use this technique, and it's really quite effective and reduces a lot of stress too. And at the end of the day, you're like, oh my gosh, I've achieved so much. So it's great.
Okay, I'll just go to this one because I think you sort of elaborate on some of that here as well.
Yeah. Okay, so in those breaks also, it's very important to take those breaks, because the same idea as in like working out or running, the rest that we take between hard workouts or hard weight sessions and so on, like that's when our body adapts to those stressors. So it's really in that time that we do some, I guess, subconscious work essentially. So those 5-minute breaks are really important. And during those breaks, like you can do activities that like don't require a lot of focus ideally. So go for a little, 5 minutes does go by fast, but you can do a lap of your apartment, sit in nature, do a bit of meditating, listen to some music. And then I guess some other breaks that for a longer break where you don't have to do much like brain work, for example, like taking a shower, I personally like sometimes, or doing the dishes, doing some mindless work. And there's definitely a lot of people who are like inventors or writers and, people who come up with ideas that they do say it's in those moments of like rest and relaxation that most of their ideas do come up to their minds. So sometimes too, I find like if I have to think about how I'm going to explain like a research question that I have and why do I want to apply it and why do I want to do it, I find like often on a run, I'll kind of like think about it, and then like those ideas will just like come to me, not when I'm working on my abstract or my paper, but actually in the times where I'm not working on it. And then, so that's kind of like what you can do for the little like shorter breaks, but it's also important to take longer breaks, and sometimes, recognize that if you are feeling stressed and overwhelmed, there's strategies you can take to start feeling better. So you can do meditation that's really relaxing. And there's a lot of apps out there that help you do like guided meditation sessions. And that really helps with like dealing with the sense of overwhelm sometimes we experience in our lives. And you can also apply growing mindful muscle in everyday life. So you can have, if you're stressed out, you can have like a calm conversation with yourself and tell yourself that everything's going to be okay. I'm going to work really hard now, and then I'm going to rest, and I'll come out stronger on the other side. And sometimes, you know what, it's okay to just turn it off and leave the stress behind and just take a break. And I kind of like that little diagram on the right where, sometimes we think we need to rest from our working out because, we're running so much and it's important to rest, and like that we know, but there's other areas of our life as well where we need to sometimes take a break from the things that we're doing. So if we need to take breaks from like our mental work, sometimes we need social breaks. So that's totally normal. You want to maybe spend some time alone on a Saturday night, once in a while instead of going out with your friends. Take a sensory break. So that's maybe from like screen time and like sounds and lights and everything that's like around us that can be overwhelming. Take emotional breaks, spiritual breaks, and creative breaks. So I quite like that idea that breaks are important for pretty much every aspect in our life. Okay. Were you going to talk about that slide or?
Yeah, I can talk about this one as
Okay.
well. So sort of just building on the idea of resting, it can take a lot of sort of courage to actually take those breaks and sort of prioritize that rest, especially when you are feeling busy. So sleep should be a huge priority, especially as athletes. And we're going to get or sort of talk a little bit more about this in just a minute here. So I won't sort of elaborate a ton on that, but other than just sort of emphasizing that that is super important, both because we are athletes, but also in terms of sort of maximizing your productivity as a student as well. And then the second sort of point here that we really wanted to make was that it is important to take extended time off. Now, ideally, that would sort of look like at least one day off a week from sort of whatever sort of your main stress is. And I mean, a lot of us as athletes will take a day off sort of to sort of rest physically. But then when we look at, let's say, something like being in school and sort of going to class full time, it is important to sort of take that rest as well. And ideally that would look like a day off where you're not studying and you're not doing assignments, etc. But in reality, that isn't always realistic, especially when you're in busy periods. So sort of leading into midterms, maybe leading into finals. But just finding a way to take both those mini breaks that Aïda talked about, but then also some of those longer breaks. So maybe that would look like for you, you'd say, okay, Sunday morning, I'm not going to think about studying. I'm not going to think about all those things that I have coming up this week. I'm going to go for my long run with my team, and then we're going to maybe go for a brunch. And then that way, when I come back to sort of sit down and maybe start my studying or working on my papers or whatever it might be on, let's say, later in the afternoon, you're sort of able to sit down and have that focus because you have been able to take time away from that type of work. And then sort of strategically planning your days off and your vacations after sort of periods of longer stress. Again, as students, you don't really get to choose when you get days off and when you get to take vacations. They're sort of planned for you. Fortunately, they generally do happen after your final exam. So that's sort of built in where you get that sort of de-stress period. But that being said, once you're working, you'll sort of have to plan for this sort of on your own and sort of pick your vacation time. I know for me as a resident, I often, if I have a sort of a busier rotation, I will try to plan at least one day off where I can make it into a long weekend and just sort of have that extended break from work. And then I look at sort of taking my vacation strategically based on sort of when I know I'm going to be sort of pressed to my limit, sort of in terms of how much I'm working and what is required of me, looking to try to take a vacation sort of after those types of rotations so that I'm able to sort of fully decompress and sort of step away from things. And so that has really helped me with stress, and just having that to look forward to as well sort of gives you that, I guess, little boost to sort of push through whatever the difficult period might be. Aïda, do you have anything to sort of elaborate on? I know that you are quite good at this kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So I know we're saying like it's good to take at least like a day off a week or something like that, but certainly like the idea of taking a full day off if you're really busy should not be like a stressor in itself. So if you do feel like doing something would make you feel better, then for me, often like the things that I'll do are kind of things like catch up things, like sometimes I call them like life admin. So, I don't know, either calling like your insurance company if you moved for a car or something like that, or booking like your blood work and stuff like that, or doing some emails, or even like time blocking your week ahead. So you're not necessarily doing like really hard mental work, but you're doing those little things that, maybe have been piling up on your desk that you can like check off your checklist, and then feel better once you've done that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now we'll move ahead and just talk a little bit about sleep in particular, which is something that I know we hear a lot about. And often I think as students, sleep is the thing that goes when we get stressed. And so we just really wanted to sort of emphasize the importance of sleep, and then sort of how to optimize the sleep that you are getting. So Ida talked a lot about routines, and she specifically sort of talked about her morning routine, but also it's super important to establish a bedtime routine that helps you to unwind. And so this can look differently for sort of each person. Some people like to read, some people do find that watching TV is helpful to unwind. Ideally, you would turn off your screens sort of 30 minutes before bed, and even more ideal would be to not have any screens in the bedroom. So in particular, not great for sleep is staring at your phone in a dark room. So if that is something that you can avoid, that is fantastic. I know many of us use our phone as our alarm, which sort of limits the ability of leaving it out of the bedroom, but maybe putting it across the room, or at least turning it onto like do not disturb or whatever, so you're not getting notifications pinging, and then having it sort of either across the room or on your nightstand or something like that, but not ideally trying not to stare at that screen in a dark room, sort of as you're leading into bedtime. Avoiding caffeine. I said after 2 p.m. That's sort of my cutoff for myself personally. I find if I have caffeine after that point, I have a difficult time falling asleep. But you sort of got to figure out what works for you. For some people, it's if they have more than 1 cup of coffee in a day that they notice that it impacts their sleep. So figure out what works for you. Sometimes for people, like large amounts of sugar can affect their sleep as well. And then alcohol can affect sleep as well. So just be cognizant of that. Often we think that alcohol sort of might make us sleep better, but often, though it can be easier to fall asleep, we often have a worse quality sleep. And so just being mindful of that. Ideally sleeping in a dark and cool room. For those of us without air conditioning in the summer, the cool aspect of it can be difficult. And certainly I know it's difficult to sleep when it's not, when it's super, super warm in your room. But if you can get things like blackout curtains to try to make it as dark as possible. And if you don't have blackout curtains, or if sort of creating that dark room isn't feasible, sleep masks are great as well. And I would recommend that, especially as if you're an athlete and you're traveling and you're staying in different hotels, I would definitely recommend investing in a good quality sleep mask, because then if you are in a hotel that doesn't have great light blocking curtains, or if you have roommates in your hotel room that either are staying up later than you or getting up earlier than you and having lights on, that isn't affecting your sleep as much. I love sleeping in a sleep mask. It is a huge go-to for me, to make sure that I get that good quality sleep. And then earplugs or a sound machine as well can be super helpful, especially when you're traveling, or if you are living with roommates who maybe are on a slightly different schedule than you and are up, sort of moving around in your apartment and potentially waking you up. Sort of either or can be super helpful, just in terms of blocking out sound and sort of ensuring that you get the sleep that you need. And then the last point that's super important is having a consistent wake up and bedtime schedule. And so ideally, we're trying to get up sort of within reason at the same time every day. And so if you're getting up at, let's say 6 o'clock on a weekday, it can be quite detrimental to your sleep to, let's say, sleep until 9 or 10 on the weekends. I know often this sort of is quite appealing to catch up on sleep. And that's not to say that you can't sleep in a little bit, but ideally sort of within, I would say, an hour is ideal. The same thing is true of bedtime. So sort of establish a bedtime that generally works for you, and then try to sort of be within about an hour of that every night. Obviously, there are occasions that you will deviate from that, and I certainly wouldn't stress if for some reason you're up a little bit later on a weekend, here or there. But as just sort of a general rule, striving to have that consistent wake up and bedtime would be super helpful with sleep. Ida, do you have anything to add?
No, yeah, other than, yeah, the unfortunate situation is, I guess, keeping it consistent even throughout the weekend, you're going to get the most effective sleep with the consistent bedtime. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think with that, like, it's, yeah, if there's events or whatever that you want to attend and it's going to be slightly past your bedtime, I wouldn't stress about that. I think where this is even more relevant is as students is trying not to pull those all-nighters, or where you're up working until sort of 2 or 3 in the morning on a regular basis. I think you're more likely to sort of, or your better option is to sort of, can you consistently get up a little bit earlier and do some of that work in the morning, or maybe you consistently push your bedtime just slightly later, but rather than sort of having those big swings on a regular basis.
Yeah. I guess in undergrad, I had convinced myself, I guess I was like, if I sleep 8 hours before a test, I'll probably be more effective at thinking about the answers during the test than if I hadn't. So.
Yeah. And yeah, I feel the same. I find it very difficult to write exams when I have stayed up later and I'm not well rested. So for me, I generally try to stop studying by 7:30 or 8 o'clock the night before a test and just do something relaxing in order to try to optimize my sleep. That isn't always possible, and some exams are more stressful than the others and you feel like you got to cram, but just being mindful of that is important.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we just wanted to take a little bit of time to just talk a little bit about some of the sort of the extra stuff that can be helpful with regards to your training, and how sort of just some strategies to come up with time for that in your busy days. So we've alluded to this so many times, but routines are super helpful. For me, sometimes if I'm busy, my stretching and rolling might get neglected during the day. So I try to make 10 minutes before bed each night to just do some of that. Some people find that they like to get up in the morning and do a little bit of that as well. So find a way to maybe build that into one of your routines. It could be part of your lunch routine. It could be sort of anywhere that fits for you, but just finding time to do that. A second sort of tip was to try to anticipate your need for therapy, such as like massage, physio, chiropractor appointments, etc., and secure appointments far enough in advance that you know that they'll fit into your busy schedule. We've all been in those scenarios where maybe our foot is bothering us or our calf is bothering us, and we are like, oh, I need a physio appointment this week. And when you look at your physio schedule, there is nothing that fits in with your class schedule or your training schedule. So sort of anticipating those potential needs in advance, maybe pre-booking a bunch of appointments sort of at the same time, either each week or every second week or whatever you think is going to work for you, because you can always cancel within whatever their cancellation policy is if you don't need that appointment, but it's hard to get an appointment if there are none available. So just sort of being mindful of that, and yeah, knowing that it's easier to cancel than it is to try to get something last minute for many professionals. And then the last thing that sort of I wanted to touch on is that something that's really worked for me is active commuting. For me, I started run commuting when I was training for a marathon, and I was a 4th year medical student, and I was trying to run, I don't know, 90 to 100 miles a week, which is a lot of time spent running. And I was also very, very busy with rotations. And so I started run commuting on a regular basis, and this worked really well for me, just in terms of getting my runs in time that I would otherwise be spent commuting on either the train or in my vehicle. Obviously, with this, it's important to figure out sort of how that's going to affect your mileage and not overdoing it. So if it's, let's say, 8 kilometers to and from work, so that would be, or school, so 16 kilometers on a day. If that's not sort of your normal mileage, you might need to figure out a way to split it up. So maybe one day you run to work and then you take the train home, and then maybe you do it differently the next day, as well as planning if you have something like practice, because again, you don't necessarily want to be running 8 kilometers in the morning and then having a practice in the evening. So just sort of planning ahead for that and how that might fit in for you. The other consideration is always, how are you going to sort of have the things that you need for either school or work there if you're running. So for me, that was often leaving like a pair of shoes at work, some clothing, and then sort of all my toiletries in a locker, so that I could just run there, and then all that stuff was there. All I needed to carry on my back was my lunch basically for the day. So just sort of coming up with ways that might work for you. Biking can be super helpful as well, if just in terms of sort of being active and not sort of just spending time sitting in your car. And that sort of is a way of getting in a little bit of extra cross training. Aida, do you have anything you want to add here?
Yeah, definitely. I think active commuting is a great way to, like, sneak in some fitness into your busy life. And then you don't have to do that run once you get home, and you just have more time for studying or working or relaxing. Definitely have alternated for many years between running, depending on where my job was, or a lot of biking. Maybe in Canada, more running in the winter and when there's snow, and then biking in the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just making sure that it's fitting in with your training plan, of course, and not sort of overdoing
And
it.
as I feel like I've gotten older too, like my schedule has changed, and sometimes I feel like with work you're more busy, or probably with now with a kid you're more busy. So then sometimes I feel like that active commuting takes off that stress of like, oh my gosh, I didn't have time to exercise today, but you got it done through commuting.
Yeah. And yeah, I think for both of us now, sometimes active commuting is our exercise.
Yeah.
And so just finding a way to do that makes sort of, that takes that stress away from wanting to exercise, but maybe not having the time elsewhere in your day, or else sort of having to do it at an undesirable time. And you're commuting in some form anyway, so it's a nice way to sort of do that. And I do find that I sort of feel more productive at work or school when I have sort of been outside and been active sort of before my day starts. So that's helpful as well.
Yeah.
Okay,
so our last topic is some of our favorite meal prep hacks. So definitely, as athletes, fueling is extremely important, and it is a big part of our day. I feel like I always have to eat 3 meals a day and then snacks, which when you think about it is a lot of food to prepare and can take a lot of time. So here are some of my favorite hacks, and then Danielle will share some of her favorite hacks. So one thing, especially for girls, I feel like, and for guys too, but always bring a snack to practice. So whether it's a bar, a Cliff Bar, a muffin that you made, something with some protein and carbs. And so then you can eat that right after you're done your cool down or your little circuits or your stretching. And then you don't have to maybe be so stressed about getting home as soon as you can, making dinner, and getting appropriate fueling right after your workout. So always have something in your bag. I also just never leave the house without a snack, because I often get really low blood sugar, and I sometimes don't know when that's going to come upon me. So I always have something in my bag with me. Another great way is to plan your meals ahead. So write out the recipes you want to make, and then make a grocery list. And like over the years, kind of my favorite way to plan is to plan 2 to 3 lunches for the week, and then 2 to 3 dinners for the week. And I usually will cook a lunch and a dinner on the same day, so not a workout day. And then I will eat leftovers for a few days. And usually one lunch or dinner will last me 2 to 3 days. I know a lot of people like to make dinner and then eat the leftovers for lunch the next day, but that means that you might have to be cooking every single evening, which me personally, I don't have time to do and I don't like doing, which is why I just pick a different meal for lunch and dinner, and I make those 2 meals on the same day. and then eat leftovers. So I'm only cooking 2 to 3 times a week. And doing that really allows you like less thinking later. So you never get home and you're like, oh, what am I going to eat tonight? And then it's also kind of a really good like cost saving strategy, honestly, because then you make your grocery list and you go to the store and you only buy what you need. And so then oftentimes you waste less food. And if you waste less food, you save money, which is great. Then if ever you're baking or anything, you can bake in bulk and freeze muffins, cookies. One of my favorite things to freeze is like on a Saturday, let's say we're having, a long run friends over for brunch or something, or even if it's just me home alone with Cam, we might make like brunch food with like pancakes for breakfast. And then I will like lay the pancakes out on a tray, put them in the freezer, the ones that weren't eaten. And then you have a big bag of pancakes in the freezer that you can just like throw into the toaster oven. And often, if they're homemade, honestly, they're probably a little bit better than what you can buy in the store. So I like doing that. Another tip that I really like doing that I got from my friend Alicia, which is like so smart, is having freezer cookies. And so it's not necessarily like having cookies in the freezer, but when you make the batter, you can make your little balls of batter of cookie dough, and then you put them on a tray, freeze them, so that they're not sticky anymore. And then you can put them into a Ziploc bag. And then when you want a cookie after dinner, a little pick me up, then you can just bake 2 to 3 cookies and you have warm, freshly baked cookies on demand. So that's like one of the best hacks ever. Yeah, and then as I mentioned, really, I find like if you're training at night, which I feel like a lot of us do, unless we're like triathletes or we like morning exercise, then I really try not to cook on workout days or big training days, because by the time you finish work or you finish school, you do your workout and then you're home at like 7:30, 7, 8, whatever. And then if you have to start cooking, you're in for a really late night. So on those days, I really try to plan to have leftovers or something really quick and easy. Yeah, so that's kind of like my favorite meal prep hacks.
Okay, and I will go through some of my ideas. I won't repeat anything that Aïda has said. I will say that her freezer cookie hack is something I'm excited to implement, to have hot, fresh cookies, because I was always making mine and then freezing them. So I'm excited to try that hack. So for me, I typically plan out my week with my partner on Sunday afternoon. We sort of think about which nights we might want to have quick meals or leftovers based on both of our schedules. And then we sort of make a grocery list that's based on our meal plan. We have a number of sort of go-to recipes that we know are quick and easy, and sort of, I would say we have about 20 recipes that we would sort of make on a rotating basis. And then just keeping these recipes organized has been a big time saver for me. So I used to be the kind of person that would always Google like chicken marinade or something like that, and then pick a slightly different one each time. Now I just have an Apple Note on my phone where I keep all of my recipes that aren't in cookbooks. And so it's easy if I, know I need a chicken marinade, I have one there that I know I like and I know I generally have all the ingredients for. So that just makes things quick and easy for me. I started doing grocery pickup during the COVID pandemic. And I've found that it has just saved me time. I like sort of sitting down, I can do it on a Sunday night, and just sort of order my groceries for pickup. It's helpful now that I'm able to do sort of all of my shopping, but I think there's like a $2 fee generally. So that could be a barrier for some people. And for some people, they might enjoy the process of grocery shopping, but I just found that pickup was something that has been helpful for me. The other thing I was going to mention is that for some people, meal prep kits, such as something like HelloFresh, I know there's a whole bunch of different ones that actually get ordered to your door, can be helpful. I found that it didn't work great for me personally. And I found that it probably wasn't super cost effective for me, but I have a friend who was ordering takeout multiple times a week and ended up doing HelloFresh. And then for her, she found that it was saving her quite a bit of money. and that, she was quite motivated to make the meals because she didn't have to sort of come up with a meal plan and do the grocery shopping herself. And so that was something that really worked for her. And so if that's something that works for you, it can be a great way to get sort of healthy, well-balanced meals, at sort of without some of the organizing that takes on your own. Another tip that I do, I keep a grocery list on my phone, and it's sort of categorized by the different stores. So like your Costco run, and then your bulk run, with anything that I know I'm going to need. So things that I don't use sort of super frequently, such as baking supplies. If I know I'm running low on baking soda, I just add it to the list so that I will never not sort of have that on hand when I need it. And that's shared with my partner so that if he goes to the grocery store, he is able to sort of see those things that we need as well. And he can add things to it as well. Like Ida said, freezing things is super helpful. So sometimes I will make a large chili or a pasta sauce or something, and then freeze it in sort of individual portions so that if I have a busy night or a busy week and I don't have sort of time to prep, either I can do leftovers or I can pull something out of the freezer and maybe just make pasta on that night, which saves me a lot of time. And then I typically, if I'm making muffins or cookies or power balls or anything like that, I'll make them in bulk, and then freeze sort of a number of them so that, again, you have that to pull from your freezer, especially during busy periods. And then Ida mentioned this, and this is a big one for me too, always carrying a snack. I got in the habit when I was on rotations in the hospital of always putting at least one Cliff Bar, sometimes two, into my pocket, so that if at times I was busy and I didn't have a chance to sort of step away and grab myself a snack, that I always had that on my person. And so that's just a consideration, especially for sort of students that might be doing things like practicums, where you're not sort of sitting super close to your bag. If you have that on you, then you're not sort of missing that key nutrition. And that comes into play with, making sure you have a snack at practice, like Ida said. And I'm similar. I take a bar no matter where I'm going, because you never know when you might need it. And it's better to have it than to not have it. So yeah, those are sort of my tips. I don't know if you have anything you want to add, Ida.
Yeah, I guess I'll just share maybe one of my favorite grocery list ways of keeping a list. So I use the Google shopping list. And what's fun with that one, that if you do have a Google Home or something like that, it's connected to your Google Home. And I've really often been making a meal and my hands are they're wet with I've been chopping vegetables or something, and I just finished an ingredient. Then you can tell your Google Home, be like, hey, Google, can you put garlic on the shopping list? So you can do it right away, because sometimes I find if I want to put it into my phone, it just slips my mind. So that's another good way of keeping lists as well, with all those Alexas and Siris and all of our assistants, virtual assistants, that are there to help us as well. So I think that concludes it for our topic today. So on the topic, I really just want to say that these are kind of from Danielle and I's personal experience and kind of our favorite things that we do to stay on track and kind of reduce the stress of a really busy life that we lead. And for sure, you take it or leave it, and you have to take all the ideas that you read online or hear from us or hear from other people and tailor them to your life specifically and do what works for you. But there's definitely a lot of resources out there, and even doing some small changes, I find, can have big effects on your day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of coming up with things that work for you, and they will likely be different than the things that work for us, but sort of finding ways to create routines and create strategies that help you to manage your time is great.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And it's also important to stay and be kind to yourself. And if you can't stick to a routine, sometimes in your life, it's really not the end of the world. Tomorrow's always another day. You can always start over. So that's really important too. You don't never want to be too rigid with them either.
Yeah, absolutely. Being flexible within your routine is important, because there's always going to be things evolving and things changing in your life. So, and I mean, as students as well, things are changing every semester. Your schedule is completely different from one semester to the next. So yeah, your routines are probably going to have to change. And so, yeah, being able to be flexible is important as well.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And thanks, Danielle, for doing this talk with me. And hopefully you guys enjoyed it and can apply some new things in your life.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.